Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. What we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. When you figure out which stories to share, difficult bosses and coworkers, successes, failures, the next step is to develop how you share them. Have you figured out your patterns, your roles in those successes, the discomfort, and your challenges? In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you. You'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? When I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your own related stories, to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. Here today as a guest on the podcast, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, is my friend Carol Campos. And we connected kind of randomly on LinkedIn, and I couldn't be more grateful for that moment that I started to dig into your website and your profile on LinkedIn. It was kind of funny because I don't always do that, but for some reason I was drawn in, which explains why I wanted to have you on this podcast. So Carol, let's start with, I just want to ask you a quick question that I always ask my guests, to share something about yourself that most people probably don't know about you. And the reason we start that way is that I like to have our listeners have a better feel for who you are before we start digging into more personal stories so they feel more connected to you.
Sure. That makes total sense. So I'm trying to think, I've blogged a lot about my life, but I think there's one thing that people might not know is that when I first went to college, I was a drama major. And I was a drama major for about a year. I was big my whole life, and daydreaming, imagination, being in drama, all of that appealed to me. And I really loved it, but I think I got scared, and I ended up switching majors, and I went into communications where I was more behind the scenes for a while. But yeah, for a brief stint, that's what I did.
A drama major. So were you an actress in high school?
I was. Yeah, I competed in Massachusetts and won a few of the awards, the Drama Guild Awards, and I just loved it. I don't think originally drama was something that I was thinking of, but when I was young, I developed asthma, and so back then they just couldn't treat me the way they can treat kids now. And so I was very sick for a long time, not able to participate in a lot of sports and things like that. So by the time I was really in a place where I was healthier, I was so far behind everyone as far as skill sets. And so I just didn't have, maybe it was even the self-esteem, like I didn't, especially in high school, that age, you just want to kind of fly under the radar. And I thought, all right, I'll go this direction. And I loved it. So it worked out.
That's so funny. I love that. So what do you think you were scared of? Was it scared of being up in front of people on the stage in a larger venue, or?
I think that's a good question. Because I did very well and got very good feedback, but it's almost, I think it's Marianne Williamson who has that quote about being afraid of your light. And I think it really did scare me to go to the next level. I definitely at that point in my life had self-esteem issues, and I don't think I had the foundation to really go to the next level and make a jump.
Wow. It makes me a little sad, but
at the
same time, because of the topic that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, it kind of makes sense to me. And I guess I'll be asking you a couple questions related to that as we move forward into the topic. So the theme that I was excited to chat with you about is how these things that happen in our lives connect to create different opportunities later on. And your website and is it a podcast that you do, Divine Breadcrumbs?
The Divine Breadcrumb, correct.
The Divine Breadcrumbs just totally caught my attention. I don't consider myself a religious person, so divine was kind of a hard word for me to swallow. I do, however, believe in kind of a universal energy that there's just no way to explain certain phenomenon. And I can say that I have some theories around it, but I don't believe in coincidence. I believe things happen the way they're supposed to happen, but not necessarily in a fatalistic way. It's more in terms of opportunities that our subconscious brings into our lives, and then it's our choice whether to take them.
Absolutely. And you touched on something that I think is important, because I am not a religious person either. I've always, I was raised Catholic, but my parents divorced and they didn't go to church. So I kind of wasn't raised in anything, except for the influence of my grandmother, but
they have a lot of influence sometimes.
Yeah, they do. But I think for a long time, I kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, I wanted nothing to do with any of that. And then as I got older and I went through certain experiences, some, difficult experiences, I was looking for something, to make sense of things. And I could really get behind that there was a universal force, source, whatever you want to call it. And for some people it's God, whatever you want to call it, but there was something that was helping us along and leaving us clues if we were willing to open our eyes and follow these. And that's why I call them divine breadcrumbs. It's, something that the universe sends you. And it's very often when you need it most that you're like, oh my gosh, thank God. And that leads you to this thing. And then you might have a chance meeting with someone, like even just you and I meeting, to me, was a divine breadcrumb. Somebody that I didn't even have a lot of interaction with said, hey, it would be great for you to talk with Sarah. And then it just worked out. So when I say divine breadcrumb, that's what I mean.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that so much, because there have been so many situations where things didn't work out the way that I thought they would or the way I wanted them to. And it ended up being a huge benefit that it didn't work the way that I thought it was going to. So it can go both ways, where you find something lands in your lap and you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I needed at that moment. But more times than not, I think these things land in our lap and we're like, oh, no, I'm not ready for this. Or that is not what I wanted. And then we have to decide, maybe it's not what we wanted, but maybe it was what we needed.
Oh, so true. And, I tend to joke that I'm one of those people who needs the brick to the head, because I think sometimes the universe will send you just a little sign, that little tap, and I'm brushing it away, not ready for that. And the signs just keep getting bigger until you have to pay attention. And quite often it happens in the form of something really traumatic. Mm-hmm. And so a divine breadcrumb can be, a positive thing or a seemingly negative. And I say seemingly negative because usually it does lead you down a better path. Like for me, pretty much the end of my marriage relationship, it was very tumultuous for many, many, many years. And when it finally ended, it was painful, but it just kind of broke things open. And then again, when my dad passed unexpectedly in 2015, that was the next step, where it's like, all right, stop wasting time. Although I don't really feel like we waste time, but there was this sense of urgency, like you need to do what lights you up.
I love that you just said, I don't believe in wasting time. I totally agree with that. I remember many years ago when my sister was in the middle of a divorce after 10 years of marriage, she said, I just feel like I invested so much and I wasted so much time. And I was like, no. None of that was wasted. Think of all the lessons you learned so that you're prepared for the next great thing that lands. And that was absolutely true. When she met her husband, it was like this huge lightning bolt of, he's so different from what I had in my previous marriage. And we talked through all those things about the lessons that you learn. And I said, I find it to be so much more important to have a list of deal breakers than to have a laundry list of the things you want from someone. And she said, well, that sounds very negative. And I said, no, it's knowledge. And what it does is those deal breakers are going to be a much shorter list,
Yes.
which means your opportunities are way bigger. Your view of the world and what you're interested in taking on is much bigger that way.
Absolutely. I love that.
So when you were fearful and you changed your major to communication, what was it, do you think? Was there an incident that triggered that fear? Or like, did you get up on stage, or did somebody say something to you that you went, oh, that's bigger than me right now? I mean, can you remember anything like that?
That's a great question. I honestly am not sure the exact moment, because I actually did get good feedback. I did enjoy it. We had talked about, I don't know if I was ready. I was a very naive 18. I had been kind of sheltered. I don't know if I was ready. I definitely missed home. As much as I wanted to leave, I did miss it. Although when I transferred, I still wasn't close to home. But yeah, I wish I could answer that. I'm not sure. I'd have to dig a little deeper.
So when you changed to communications, do you remember that first class and why communications was that next step for you?
Yeah, communications. So the way, so I went to Hofstra University, and I don't know if they still do it this way, but you can focus on 3 different tracks: TV, journalism, and film. And I had wanted to do TV, but because I was transferring, a lot of the TV classes were filled, and they said, well, there's other classes that you're going to need to take. We do have this one film class open. It's an introduction, and it is a required course. So I got into the film track because I absolutely loved it. I always had a love of movies, pretty much passed down from my dad, all the classics. And, I learned how to, not just how to make a movie, because we did have to shoot our own films and edit our own films, but just kind of dissecting some of the movies that I loved the best and understanding the symbolism and why a director or a cinematographer would make certain choices in lights and settings. And I just loved it all. However, not the most practical of majors. But again, this goes back to me being the dreamer, me being wanting to be in my own little world. And although I do have some friends who became very successful, I have a friend, I did a podcast with her, I think it was the 3rd one, Missy Cohen. Her big break was Silence of the Lambs. And then she's just gone from there. So
oh my gosh.
Music and sound editor. Yeah. So it does happen. But I think I was just still floundering. It's like, okay, I like this, but what am I going to do with this? And I just kept kind of falling into things, but they really weren't my passion. And when I graduated, the economy wasn't good. And I just kind of took and I ended up going back to Massachusetts. Probably things could have been different if I stayed in New York, but I didn't. And, but then I went to my daughter. So anyway, it kind of worked out the way it worked. And, I just kind of followed the path that was expected. I get my job, work hard, take 1 or 2 vacations a year, repeat, even if you hate the job like this. And I didn't think beyond that. It's like, all right, this is what I'm doing. And it really became urgent. Like I said, once my dad passed, like, this is ridiculous. This is not what I want to do. This is not what I should be doing. And I did something that nobody expected that I would do, including me. And I decided I'm leaving. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but I need to work on myself, and I need to figure this out and get back to that creative space that I used to love. I don't know what that's going to look like. And so I thought about it for a while. I gave a month's notice, and made the leap. And believe me, I don't recommend this to everyone, leaving a job without something concrete to go to. But for me, I knew I needed it. If I had just jumped into another job, it would have been the same dynamic and I would be wondering the same thing. So I hired a life coach and I spent the summer walking in nature, meditating, visualizing, manifesting, learning, chatting with friends over coffee. And what probably looked to a lot of people as what a lazy piece of bleep was really this inner work that I needed to do to prepare myself for what would become the divine breadcrumb. I needed that foundation where I was feeling good about myself and really had found my voice. So yeah, although, like I said, the film and some of the choices I make really seem arbitrary and strange and not the best. Looking back, it's just following all these little points that all led here.
Isn't that amazing when you can do that? You look back and you see the connections and why they happened.
Yeah.
And I don't think enough people do that. And the reason I find it to be so important to look back and see it is because I don't think we know ahead of time where we're going to be or what's going to happen. And so in order to give us that foundation and the faith in ourselves and whatever we believe, but the faith in ourselves, we have to know where we came from and say, I made it through that. And all of these things connected to get me to where I am now. So I'm going to have to trust that what I decide next is part of where I need to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what it's all about. And I wish I had believed that in my 20s. You know, like we were touching on earlier, I think, you know, talking with my daughter or even kids a lot younger, they're catching on to that way faster than we ever did.
I know, it's so awesome. And they also have such a such a hard path right now, because one of the things I think a lot about is that when we were growing up, you know, we had kind of a pattern, a path that we were supposed to follow, and many of us didn't necessarily follow it directly, like me. Because I don't let anyone tell me what to do, and that's often to my downfall. But what I find is, you know, I knew I was going to go to college right out of high school because that was what we did. That was our family's thing.
Yep.
And all my friends that I was close with, we were all on that same track. You know, you finish high school, you go to college, you get a job, and that's kind of how things were supposed to be laid out. And there were advantages to that. And the advantage was that we kind of had an idea of where we were going to go next and what was expected of us. And there's some advantages to that, because then you don't have to worry so much about whether you're making the right decision for you. You were totally stressed about whether you were making the right decision for you, but you had limited options. And now these kids that are coming into their late teens and early 20s now, it's this wide open path now. And that can be just as overwhelming as feeling like you're stuck in limited pathways.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we had it where you're right. It felt safe because this was the path. And as long as you took it, well, I don't know what's going to happen after this, but at least you know the first few steps ahead of you.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true.
I think about that. One of our first topics that you and I were talking about, maybe covering, was talking about transition. And this actually fits into a vision that I have of that I have shared with a few people, is that right now, all these women that I know in their 40s and 50s, and some actually even in their 30s, and these young adults in their late teens and early 20s, are all in this same weird transition because our workforce is changing so dramatically. Our economy is changing. The global community is changing in terms of expectations and how we define success. And I think about the fact that it's like being really, really hungry. You are so hungry. There's some sort of dissatisfaction kind of spinning around, and you're just so hungry. So you walk into a restaurant and the menu has like 150 items on it. And you're just so overwhelmed by all these choices that you walk out hungry.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I visualize how people are going through transition right now, rather than seeing it as, well, I'm just going to get the egg rolls right now because I'm so hungry. And then I'll take a little walk and I'll come back and I'll eat something else. And then maybe I'll find another restaurant and snack somewhere else for a little while. Like, that's how I think of my life, where other people, some people that are really in that fight or flight, and they're stuck because there are too many options and they can't pick just one. They're thinking that picking one means long term, and that's not necessarily the case.
No, that's such a good point. And I think just recently, in making this transition for myself, I've started to get that. It's like, okay, well, it's not the end of the world if I go down this path. And I mean, things keep evolving for the Divine Breadcrumb right now, and it probably will continue to do so. But I think you're right. For so many people, it's very scary. I mean, my mom's generation, when I told her, I'm going to leave my job as a manager at a Fortune 10 company to do what? I don't know, Mom. I mean, imagine how that, and she was, to her credit, she's been so supportive, even though I know she's scared for me. What is this? Because she was raised the same way. You go to school, you get your job, even if you hate it, that's what you do. And I was the same way. This was a huge shift for me, and I totally get it. For a lot of people, this is so foreign. It's so overwhelming. But until you're in it, then you just, I don't know, you just kind of go with it. It's hard to explain.
Well, and I think part of that is surrounding yourself with the right people, because as terrifying as it is to jump out on our own the way that we have in this past couple of years, it's I feel like, because I've surrounded myself with people who are not only cheerleaders, but they're awesome resources. I can't even tell you the people that I've met face-to-face through the No Longer Virtual conference. They are right there when I need something. Zach Messler, for instance, he is a content guy, and I'll send him a draft of like a promotional blog that I'm going to post, or an email I'm going to send, and say, what do you think of the language here? And in 15 minutes, he sends me back comments. And this is the kind of relationship that is what makes our transition possible and probable.
Absolutely. We certainly don't do it alone. You're so right. I mean, I've had, whether it's friends, mentors, and people who've just come out of the woodwork who, and again, Divine Breadcrumb, never thought I'd meet them, but they came out of the woodwork at exactly the right time. And it's just amazing. And I feel like, not to get all woo-woo, but it's, if you open yourself up to that and just go with it, it's going to keep happening even more. There's
Agreed.
There's a great book by Pam Grout. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She actually has a couple of books, but the first one I read, it's called E Squared. And it's all about basically testing the universe. And she gives you all of these exercises to kind of prove that the universe is working in your behalf. She's a hilarious, great writer anyway, but it's a really cool book for anyone who's kind of on the fence about it. I don't know. I just find it so fun. And I find that you can kind of be an alchemist and kind of use it to make things go your way.
Mm-hmm, definitely. So tell me, I kind of want to get back to this whole, the breadcrumbs of not believing in coincidence. Tell me a small world story that just pops into your head, something that clearly shouldn't have happened. The statistics, the probability is totally against it.
Oh gosh, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. Well, I'll tell you a recent one that actually had to do when I was launching the business. And my business partner is my best friend of 20 plus years. I had this idea, told her about it. She got really excited. And we spent hours talking. We were both, when you're all buzzy and excited and
Oh yeah.
that great feeling. And we had decided like, okay, what's a great way we could showcase people on the website? There's so many people doing great things, like heartfelt things. And we thought, all right, well, we can do a podcast. Well, neither one of us knew a thing about doing a podcast, nothing. And literally the next day, she got an email in her inbox from, I think it was Creative Live, and it was a week-long free podcast training. And you could get it free if it was live streaming. Otherwise, it was a few $100s. And it was just, that was one of those things, like we just mentioned it, it happened. We didn't really have the funds to be spending hundreds of dollars to get this going. And so that was a big one. But even meeting my friend was a big one. We worked together at a company just for a few months, and a 20 plus year friendship developed out of that. We weren't even on the same team. There was one project she was asked to come in for, and things like that. I don't take lightly, those people that come into your life, and everything changes after that.
It does. And the likelihood is just so small.
It really is.
That's why I think of it in these terms, because if you look at the probability of this particular person showing up at this particular time, it's just so unlikely.
Right. And yes, and the timing of it is probably crucial, and she ended up thinking that the company was crazy, which it kind of was. And she ended up leaving after a little bit, but we stayed in touch, and the rest was kind of history.
Yeah. I'm such a big believer in exploring those relationships. And when you feel that kind of connection, really exploring it, making that effort to figure out what part of your life that fits into and for how long.
Yeah.
I don't think they're that common that it would be 22 years, 23 years later. But at the same time, you just don't know. So why not explore it?
Exactly. And I do think it's just keeping an open mind, because there's been times where there might be someone who in the past, well, they kind of irritated me or whatever, but they taught me some lesson, like looking back, oh my gosh, this person was one of my biggest teachers, or sent me in a direction that had I not had that experience, where would I be today? And I truly don't believe there's any wrong paths. I think there's different ones that can serve you, but I'm pretty happy with the path I'm on now. So grateful for the good and the bad.
Definitely. So one of my favorite small world stories is, and I don't know why this happened, but it was kind of strange. It was, gosh, more than 10 years ago, but it still resonates with me. I was down in Denver visiting my brother, and my sister had come in from California to celebrate my brother's birthday. It was a big birthday. And he had planned kind of a pub crawl with a bunch of his friends. And it was before Twitter. There was some other product out there that he was sharing where we were. Every time we'd take a cab or walk somewhere, he would post out where we were so that other friends could meet up with us. And we're at some bar. My sister and I had too much to drink, and we were laughing our heads off. We couldn't stop laughing. I mean, tears kind of laughter. And at some point, my brother came over to me and he said, "Sarah, I want you to meet my friend Jeff." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I walked over and he said, "Jeff, this is my sister, Sarah." And he said his name was Jeff Cass. And I said, "Cass?" And he said, "No, Cass." And I said, "Oh, that's an unusual name." And I started laughing. I said, "My first boyfriend in 5th grade, he was Cass." And I saw Jeff kind of smile, just dismissively almost, like, "Oh, that's nice." And I said, "Did you grow up here in Denver?" He said, "No, I grew up in LA." And I looked at him, my eyes opened a little wider, and I said, "Okay, I'm just going to put this out there because you just never know." It was at Canterbury Elementary School, and his name is Brian Cass. He said, "That's my little brother."
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so that's a big one.
the thing that startled me about it, I mean, it's startling anyway. I said, no way, because I had had too much to drink. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, no, he's just pulling my leg. He's just teasing me because he knows I've had too much to drink. He said, no, seriously. We went to Canterbury, and he's a doctor now. He's living in Albuquerque. And I just looked at him. I said, you're serious? And he said, yeah. Brian Katz, my brother, we just started laughing. And the thing that startled me wasn't so much that this was such a small world story, even though it was definitely startling. What really caught me off guard is that my brother had known this guy for years. They had worked together for years, and they didn't know they'd gone to the same elementary school. Jeff was a year ahead of my brother, but they never mentioned, like, that's just not a question they had asked. It's not part of their lives that they had talked about.
How funny.
And I thought, well, no wonder people don't believe in what we believe, like that people believe in coincidence. It's because they're not asking the right questions.
Right. Exactly. You got to get curious. You really do.
Absolutely. Because I guess part of that too is wanting to connect.
Yeah. That wanting and need for connection is big for some people. Others, not so much. For me, I love it. And I thrive on that. But I think if you're looking for it, it probably comes to you a lot more quickly.
Yes, because you're going to ask the questions to figure out how you're connected.
Oh, yeah. But I even do little tests. I'll take a walk and say to myself, okay, I haven't gotten any kind of sign in a while, like show me a feather, or show me when I'm driving home on a license plate that has these numbers or whatever. And I just play around with it. And when it happens, it's the coolest thing. And it happens a lot more than people think.
I agree. But I don't think it's anything magical. So my theory is that our subconscious brain is so advanced, so much more than we give it any credit for. So when we're choosing a feather as opposed to a mountain lion, you know, it's because our subconscious has already had a cue that we're going to see something like that.
Yeah, that could be. And you're right. I mean, it's not really magic. I think it's the way the world works, but it feels magical. It gives you that, like, this is really fun.
And that chill, when you get the hairs rising up on the back of your neck.
Exactly. So yeah, no, I totally agree.
I love that. There's something about those connections that I think makes us feel part of a much bigger story.
Absolutely. I had a friend of mine from high school. Actually, she wasn't even a friend from high school. She was an acquaintance. And one day on Facebook, it was a few years ago, probably about 6 years ago, we were both commenting on the same thing. And it just seemed like we had things in common. She ended up messaging me saying, hey, would you like to get together for dinner? I thought, okay. And I not that I was nervous, but I was like, gosh, we didn't really talk in high school, but this will be interesting, And we had the best conversation. We were interested in so many of the same things. And she said, I go to this woman who does Reiki. And I didn't really know much about Reiki. And I said, okay, well, I'll look it up. And she's like, I know things have been rough because I had just gotten out of a relationship. And, I was just kind of in that weird headspace. She said, I think it would really help. And so I went to see this woman, and to this day, we're good friends, and that's led to other things. And so I thought, wow, that one dinner, what if I had said no? What if I had just been like, I don't know if this is, No, it just led to that meeting led to so many things on my current path. It's just amazing. So all those connections along the way.
I have found so many times that it's the second degree connection that makes the difference.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. Yes.
Because when you say yes to one thing, that doesn't mean that it's only going to lead to one thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of the second degree connection. And when you look at something like LinkedIn, a platform like LinkedIn, when I'm looking through the people who are asking me to connect with them, and I see 14 mutual connections, or 450 mutual connections, or 700 mutual connections, I always think about, if we have 700 mutual connections, it's unlikely we're going to have all that many second degree connections. But if we have 14 mutual connections, that actually exponentially improves my chances of having second degree connections.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it. Yes.
So I love to check out that aspect of relationships, about that second degree, because so many times it's opening yourself up to that first step is what's going to lead to so much more.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it keeps going back to being open to it. And sometimes it's scary to put yourself out there, but it's almost always worth it.
Yes, I would agree with that. And almost, just because sometimes it's more painful than we thought it was going to be.
Right.
Usually we overestimate the pain, but every once in a while it's a little bit of an underestimate.
Exactly.
I had one of those at a job that I accepted because I was just in the process of finishing up an MBA, and I took this job as a compliance officer for a big federal grant, thinking that I needed that finance side of my experience because I had management, strategy, marketing, public affairs, that stuff. But I didn't really have any finance side. And that was a terrible fit for me. I don't even like rules. What made me think I could be a compliance officer? And I did it, and I did a good job of it. But my goodness, that was so painful. And it was worth it. I learned so much in that time about myself, about my career, about what I didn't want. Again, that was one of those excellent lists of deal breakers that I could make.
Yeah.
And when I took my next job, I had a few offers for the first time in my career, because I live in a small town. I actually had multiple offers that I had to choose from. And I remember kind of putting together my little list of deal breakers and using that as my priority list, figure out which job I should take. The first things on it was the environment. I had to be in a place where I had windows, where I felt safe, where I didn't feel like somebody could micromanage me, looking over my shoulder all the time, because I don't tolerate that well, because I work really hard.
Same.
And I remember walking into the office of where I ended up accepting that job. This is my last job that I had before going solo. And it was this beautiful office in a very old building with huge windows facing east, so I could see the sunrise in the winter. I'm never up in the sunrise in the summer, and it was right over the Helena Cathedral, so you could see the sun rising through the cathedral. When the sun set, that was the pink and purple side of the sky. And beautiful. I remember walking in there and thinking, okay, this is the one. And if I had a laundry list of things I wanted, I might not have been open to that particular option.
Exactly. Oh, I love that.
So tell me one more story before we kind of wrap up, about something that happened that was another one of those breadcrumbs, and maybe earlier on in your life, or maybe after your father died, because I know that I had a lot of those when my father passed away about 5 years ago.
Yeah, let's see. One of the things that was big for me, I tended to flit from one thing to another. It's like, I'll get certified in Reiki. And I was all about it. And then I'd finish, and it wasn't that I didn't like it. I just didn't really do anything with it. And then I'd go to something else. And this happened for a long time. I'd go to a workshop, I'd go here, I'd go there. And I'd start kind of beating myself up about that. Why do I keep doing this? I mean, it's fun, but I'm not doing anything with it. And then one day I saw a talk that Liz Gilbert gave of Eat, Pray, Love fame. And I think it was on an Oprah thing she was doing across the country. Anyway, I saw it on TV, and she told this story about how she did this talk in front of this really big audience, and she was talking about life's purpose, and she felt like she knocked it out of the park, and that everybody got a lot out of this talk. And when she got back to her hotel room, she's looking at Facebook, and a comment caught her eye, and it was basically this woman who said, I was at your event, and you were talking about life purpose, and it really made me feel like crap. because I don't have a life purpose. I don't know what it is. And it really got Liz Gilbert thinking, like, yeah, I can get why that would make someone feel really frustrated. And she kind of came up with the theory that there's the jackhammer people that I know what I want. You know, you're a little kid. I know I want to be a doctor. That's what I'm going to be. I know what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a writer. But then there's the other people like me who
like
are
90% of us, I think.
Which she calls the hummingbird people that flit from thing to thing, but pollinate as they go and learn and teach others. And it was like, yes, that is me. And I needed to hear that, because all of those things I've learned over the last, especially 8 years, I am now using as kind of a jumping off spot for some of the things we want to do with the Divine Breadcrumbs, some of the things I want to do in my coaching business. And it just kind of all came together. I needed to hear it.
So do you think that we are always one or the other, or do you think we change?
I honestly think we change. I think, it's getting back to when we were talking about being curious. And I think that's kind of the hummingbird. You're trying little bits and things. And eventually, though, there's going to be that thing that, okay,
the lightning
is it. Now, I don't know if it happens to everyone in a lifetime. I hope for everybody that they find it. For me, I finally found it, and it took a long time. I'm going to be 52 next month. I'm doing like this huge pivot very late in my career, but it's okay. I'm happy. It feels good. It totally lights me up and energizes me. And I think it's just being patient and being open to trying new things and kind of seeing what might be that thing that lights you up.
And even now, staying open to it, even if you do have a purpose.
Yeah.
Because
you're right. Right. It's not written in stone. I mean, I could, in 2 years, there might be something else where I pivot again. I don't know. And I think this experience, because I had always been, follow this path. Now that I've made this jump, it's a lot easier to make a jump again. And it's not going to be as scary.
Exactly. I think about that a lot, because my husband kind of gives me a hard time because I've been a hummingbird all the years we've been together, for 24 years or something like that. And I have been that same hummingbird. But what's interesting is that when I had my lightning bolt moment last year about what I do specifically and could actually pinpoint services that could really provide a lot of value for clients, I hit that point where I realized that all of my previous experiences, all those hummingbird moments, were actually dots that were connecting to get me to where I am. And when I was telling my husband about it, and he's kind of rolling his eyes, because here we go again. What's the next flavor of the day for you? I realized that I am not in denial at this point. Like, I am so all into what I'm doing right now, and I just love it. But if next year I'm not so excited about it, I'll do something else.
Exactly.
And I love that vision of the hummingbirds, because they pollinate.
Yes.
And you just never know how your second degree connections are going to help others.
Exactly. And that's where I'm going now too, because I finally was able to kind of hone in, okay, what can I do with all of this? It's like, gosh, there's so many people who need this information, who are looking for this information, and I have it. And it made me think of something else. We're kind of picking up our breadcrumbs along the way, but we're also leaving some behind. So there's people picking up behind us, and they need what we're putting out there too.
Oh, I love that. Until we started talking about that pollination, I wasn't going there in my mind, but that's absolutely right. And we can feel really good about that, no matter where we are in our lives. We can feel good about that.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, this has been really a special conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I love talking small world and connections, and this definitely fit exactly what I had in mind for our conversation. So thank you so much, Carol.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been so fun.
Well, we will talk again soon. And for our listeners, I will have a link to Carol's LinkedIn profile so that you can connect with her. And we will have links to some of the things that we referred to during our conversations, like books and videos. So thank you, Carol, and we will talk again soon.
Hey, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?